My son told me never to visit again, but when I did, I found his wife crying in the kitchen. "Mama, please don't come here again." Those were the words that broke me. They didn't come from a stranger, or an enemy, or a neighbor gossiping behind my back. They came from my own son, the boy I once carried on my back through the market rain, the child whose first steps I celebrated with tears of joy. For a moment, I thought I heard him wrong. I asked gently, "What did you say, Daniel?" He looked away, avoiding my eyes, and said even quieter, "Mama, please. We need space. You shouldn't visit anymore." I stood there, holding the small pot of egusi soup I had cooked that morning. It was still warm, covered neatly with foil. I had traveled 2 hours under the hot sun just to bring it, because my daughter-in-law had told me over the phone that they were too busy to cook that week. And now my son was telling me not to visit again. The words didn't make sense. My lips trembled. I looked at him, tall, confident, dressed in a fine shirt, standing in front of his new house. For a second, I saw my little boy again, the one who used to tug at my wrapper and say, "Mama, don't go to work today. Stay and play with me." But that boy was gone. "Daniel, did I offend you?" I asked quietly.
He sighed.
"No, Mama, it's not that. Grace needs peace, and sometimes when you come, things become tense." Tense. That word stabbed me deeper than I expected. How could a mother's visit bring tension? I tried to speak again, but my throat tightened. The air between us felt heavy. Even the compound seemed to go quiet. Then Grace appeared in the doorway, my daughter-in-law, her eyes tired but polite. She didn't greet me with a hug like before. She just stood there, holding the door slightly open, as if she couldn't wait for me to leave. I smiled through my pain. "I brought soup," I said softly. "Your favorite." She nodded, whispering, "Thank you, Mama," but didn't come closer. Daniel took the pot from my hands. "We'll eat later," he said quickly, then turned away. Something inside me cracked. I had raised this boy with my bare hands. I had scrubbed hospital floors to pay for his school fees. I had gone without food so he could eat. And now he was shutting me out of his life, without even a reason that made sense. I felt small standing there, small like the day his father died, and I had to face the world alone. But that day, I had courage. This time, I only had silence. So I nodded slowly, forcing a shaky smile. "It's fine, my son. God bless your home." I turned around, and with each step away from that house, the world felt colder. I didn't cry until I got to the bus stop. I sat on the bench, clutching my empty food flask, and the tears came quietly one after another until the metal in my hands felt as cold as my heart. I tried to pray, but all I could say was, "God, what did I do wrong?" People passed by, women selling plantain, children running after the bus. Life kept moving, but I felt frozen in my pain. The bus conductor shouted, "Madam, you day go or you no day go?" I nodded, wiping my eyes. "I day go." But deep down, I knew I had already lost something. Not just my pride, not just the joy of motherhood, but a piece of my soul, the part that still believed a child could never turn his back on his mother. Sighs softly, voice trembling. That was the day I told myself I would never visit again. But sometimes, life has a way of bringing you back to the very door that once broke your heart. And when I finally went back, months later, I didn't find my son waiting with open arms. I found his wife,
Crying.
all alone, in the kitchen. And that was the beginning of a truth I was never meant to hear. My name is Martha James, and I am 71 years old. I am a Black mother, born in the South and carried by buses and prayer to a gray northern city where the winters bite and the rent never sleeps. I have known love, and I have known a long kind of loneliness that sits beside you at the kitchen table and watches the clock. I tell this story slowly, so I do not miss the truth that God put in every small moment. I grew up in a house that smelled like cornmeal and hair grease, where my grandmother would hum while shelling peas and my mother would say, "Baby, keep your voice kind. That's the only way the world will hear you." We didn't own much, but our hands knew how to make soup stretch and joy last. My first Bible was missing its first few pages, but the Psalms were whole, and that was enough. When I turned 18, my bag held 2 dresses, a comb, and a recipe for sweet cornbread written on the back of a church bulletin. I met Anthony in a laundromat with cracked tiles and a soda machine that ate quarters. He was tall, with a smile that felt like a front porch after rain. We married in a church that had paint peeling from its windowsills, and still, it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. Our reception was a potluck in the fellowship hall. Somebody's auntie brought a lemon cake that tasted like a promise. Our son Daniel arrived on a Tuesday, small and fierce, lungs full of a country choir. He had a birthmark near his shoulder that looked like a comma, as if God was saying, "There's more to this boy." I walked the floor with him on nights when the city sirens would not sleep. I told him, "Mama is here. Mama is always here." The year Daniel turned 4, Anthony kissed my forehead and drove to the late shift. He never made it back. I heard the news at 2:30 in the morning, and something in me fell through the floor and kept falling. Grief does not shout. Sometimes it whispers, and the whisper never ends. I was left with a little boy who still couldn't tie his shoes, and a rent that could tie a noose around your joy if you let it. So I went to work. A diner by morning, at the hotel by night, and sometimes a church basement in the winter, sorting coats for families who needed warmth. I learned the rhythm of aching feet and swollen fingers. I learned how to smile at customers who used the word girl like it was my first name. Daniel was bright. He loved shapes and shadows. He would stand by the window and trace the square of sunlight on the floor with his finger. When he started school, I ironed his uniform until it looked new, even when it wasn't. I whispered to his collar, "Stand tall," before shaking out the wrinkles, as if fabric could carry courage. He grew fast, taller than me by 13, and by 15, he was helping the deacon stack chairs after service. I remember one Sunday, Pastor Lee told the congregation, "This young man brings his mother to church, not the other way around." I felt that line settle in my chest like a warm stone. It is a rare thing to be escorted into hope by your own child. Money was a shadow that followed us into every room. I stretched groceries with rice and prayer. There were nights I gave Daniel the last piece of chicken and told him I'd already eaten at work, and then I rinsed my mouth with warm water so it would believe the lie. Poverty has a sound. It is the scrape of one more spoon across a clean pot. When Daniel was in high school, we lived in an apartment where the heat clicked and stuttered. The landlord said the boiler was temperamental, like it had feelings of its own. I put plastic over the windows to keep the wind out, and a towel at the bottom of his door, so the warmth would not escape. He studied by the cheap lamp I found at a thrift store, his face shining with that stubborn light that only hungry children know. He wanted a laptop. I wanted to be the kind of mother who didn't have to choose between electricity and a dream. So I took on a cleaning contract at an office building downtown, the kind with long hallways and carpets that never remember your name. For 3 months, I rolled my cart, emptied trash that smelled like someone else's lunch, and cleaned mirrors until I could not see myself. On a Saturday that felt like breath after holding it too long, I bought a second-hand laptop with one bright spot on the screen where the pixels had given up. Daniel opened it like it was a doorway. He made honor roll. He made me learn a new kind of prayer, the kind where gratitude is an ache. When the acceptance letters came for college, he laid them on the table in a row like hymnals. We chose the school with the scholarship that covered everything but the little things, and the little things are always the heaviest. So I picked up more shifts. Move-in day was a bouquet of joy and fear. His dorm smelled like new paint and somebody else's future. I labeled his food containers with my neatest handwriting and tucked a note under his pillow. "Remember who you are. Love, Mama." That night I rode the bus home alone and sat in the dark with his baby pictures, letting the quiet hurt me all the way through. Daniel called often at first. He told me about professors who wore scarves even in summer, about a friend who played trumpet in the quad, about a girl named Grace who made him laugh when he was homesick. He said, "Mama, she's gentle. You'll like her." I said, "Then I like her already." Grace was soft-spoken when I met her, small hands, careful eyes, a kindness that didn't advertise itself. She called me Mama James the first time, and it folded me up with gratitude. They visited on Sundays and ate my stew like it was medicine. Grace washed dishes afterward without my asking, and I made a place for her in my prayers. Daniel worked part-time, studied, and still managed to call me before bed. We had a ritual. He would say, "Mama, cover me," and I would pray Psalm 121 over him. "The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in." I did not have money to protect him, but I had words that had been faithful longer than any paycheck. He graduated in a black gown that fit like a new skin. I sat on a metal chair under a white tent and clapped until my palms stung. When he walked across the stage, he turned his head like he could hear my heart from there. After the ceremony, he hugged me so tight my old bones sang. He whispered, "I did it, Mama." I told him, "We did." His first job felt like a promise kept. He texted me a picture of his desk, clean, bright, a little plant in the corner. I printed the picture and put it on my refrigerator with a magnet from the dollar store. Every morning I stood in front of it and said, "Thank you." When he saved up enough for a small car, he drove me to the lake and let me pick the music. We rolled down the windows and sang old songs with too much joy for the melody. Standing at the water, he said, "One day, I'll buy you a house with a big porch, Mama." I thought, I don't need a porch. I just need your voice in my hallway. He and Grace announced their engagement under a string of backyard lights at her cousin's cookout. People clapped, somebody shouted about time, and I wept into a paper napkin. Grace's mother hugged me and said, "We are family now." I believed her. Wedding planning was a storm of lists and little arguments that meant nothing in the end. We settled on a simple ceremony, white lilies, and a cake that made us all quiet after the first bite. When they exchanged vows, I remembered Anthony's hands in that same church, and I felt the ache of time and the mercy of it too. I went home that night and laid my dress on the chair like it needed to sleep. After they married, I gave them space. I know newlyweds need a place to breathe, the kind of air that makes a marriage grow. I called on Fridays to ask if they needed anything. Sometimes I cooked. Sometimes I just sent a prayer by text. "God, keep your home warm," I'd write. With a little heart, I learned to tap with my thumb. At first, the invitations came easily. "Come by Sunday, Mama." Grace made chili. "Come taste." I would bring plantains and stories and sit at their table like I had finally put down the burden of years and picked up rest. I watched them build routines. The way he reached for her hand when laughing, the way she leaned on his shoulder when the news was sad. Then, very slowly, the weather inside their home began to change. It is hard to tell the first day a storm chooses you, because it always starts with a cloud you ignore. Daniel's calls became shorter. Our Fridays moved to every other week, then "I'll call you next week," and then, "Mama, things are busy." I'll text. Busy is a real thing in this life. But sometimes busy is the new name we give to distance. I did not push. I have learned not to chase grown children. Love must be the door they open on their own. But I cooked on a Saturday anyway, egusi, collards with a little smoked turkey, cornbread that didn't crumble, and I carried it across town in a bag that cut into my palm. I rang the bell with the hope of old women who believe casseroles can heal what counseling cannot. Grace opened the door. She smiled, but it was a thin thing. Behind her, the house looked tidy and quiet like a photograph. I said, "I won't stay long," even though I had long stories folded under my tongue. Daniel came down the stairs after a moment, adjusting his cuff as if greeting me needed dressing up. He hugged me, quick, the way people hug deadlines. We made small talk. He checked the time twice. When I stood to leave, he walked me to the porch and said, "Mama, next time call before you come." I rode the bus home with my hands in my lap like a child who had been told to sit still. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself he was tired. I told myself children do not know how loud their small corrections sound inside their mother's chest. Weeks later, I tried again. I called first this time, and Grace answered with a careful voice. "Mama James, we're sorting a few things. Maybe next week." Her words stood on tiptoe, trying to reach a politeness that couldn't quite touch me. I said I understood. Then I sat in my kitchen and let the clock fill the room with its ticking. There is a math to motherhood that nobody teaches you. You weigh the love you gave against the love you receive, and tell yourself the scale is broken for a reason. You count the nights you stayed by a feverish bed and subtract the mornings you woke alone to an empty phone. You divide your heart by the days, and somehow, you are still whole. Daniel brought me a bouquet for Mother's Day, a neat row of white roses. He stayed 20 minutes. He said work was demanding and Grace was adjusting and the city was a lot. He forgot to ask how I was sleeping. When the door closed, I put the flowers in the good vase and felt like a guest in my own life. Still, I kept faith. Some distance is a season, not a sentence. I told myself, they will call when they need me. I did not know then that the call would not be from my son. It would be from the quiet kitchen where his wife would try not to cry. Before everything broke, there were small mercies. A birthday brunch where Grace handed me a card with a butterfly on it. A Sunday evening when the three of us prayed for a neighbor's child in the hospital, and our amen braided us together for a breath. A Tuesday text from Daniel. Love you, Ma. Busy, but thinking of you. I kept that one. I read it like medicine. I tell you all this so you understand that love did live in that house at the beginning. It was not always closed doors and careful words. There was laughter that rolled down those stairs and set a place for me at the table. There was a boy who used to run to the door when he heard my key, and a young woman who called me Mama like the word was soft bread. But seasons turn. Jobs end. Pride grows like a weed in the clean lines of a new life. And sometimes the very people you taught to speak truth will choose silence, because truth asks too much. I kept my phone on loud every night for a year. I told myself, if he needs me at 2 a.m, I will hear it. Most nights all I heard was the refrigerator hum and the city breathing through the thin walls. On one of those nights, I remember my grandmother's words. Child, God builds a fence around the faithful. Sometimes the fence is distance. I wondered what she meant. I would learn, but not yet. When the day came that Daniel said, Mama, please don't come here again, it did not fall from a clear sky. It descended from a cloud that had been gathering for months, maybe years, while I kept cooking and hoping and folding my hands in the quiet. I had told myself that love could survive anything if you fed it often enough. What I forgot is that pride will not eat. I am telling you who I am not to make you pity me, but to help you see me. I am a woman who scrubbed floors and sent a son to college. I am a woman who learned how to carry grief on one shoulder and groceries on the other. I am a woman who will always knock softly before entering the rooms of other people's joy. And I am the mother who stood on a bright afternoon with a warm pot of soup in her hands, and learned that love sometimes waits on the porch while pride pretends it is peace. When I finally went back, defying my own vow, I did not go to prove a point. I went because something in the air around my prayers felt thin, like fabric about to tear. I went because a mother's spirit knows the sound of unraveling, even from across town. And when I crossed that threshold, it was not my son who met me. It was Grace. On the floor. In the kitchen. Crying like her heart had been taken out and set down where she could see it. That is where the next part of the story begins. But to understand what I did in that moment, how I touched her shoulder, what I said, what I did not say, you needed to know all of this. The long road, the small mercies, the slow storm. Because nothing breaks suddenly. It only breaks where it was already thin. And I was about to learn just how thin their marriage had become and how pride, my son's pride, had been getting fat at their table while hunger sat by the door. When I found Grace crying that morning, her tears came like rain on glass, soft, constant, helpless. I didn't know if I should speak or just hold her. The last time I had seen her, she couldn't even look me in the eye. Now she was on the kitchen floor, her head in her hands, whispering through sobs I could barely understand. Her shoulders shook like she'd been holding pain too long, afraid to let it be seen. I stepped closer, quietly. Grace, I said softly, what's wrong, my child? She looked up at me as if she was seeing a ghost. Mama James, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know you'd come. I nodded slowly. I just felt I needed to check on you. She wiped her face quickly with the back of her hand, embarrassed by her own tears. I'm sorry you had to see me like this. I bent down beside her, my knees aching but my heart heavier than that pain. Don't be sorry, I said gently. Just tell me what's going on. At first, she shook her head, but then the words began to spill out like water from a cracked jar. Daniel, he's not the same man anymore, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I frowned, waiting. She continued, he comes home late, sometimes angry, sometimes not at all. He won't talk to me. He won't pray with me. He just sits there in silence.
Her words pressed against my chest.
I wanted to defend him, my son, my pride, but deep down, I knew this wasn't the Grace I remembered. This wasn't the house of laughter I once sat in. What happened, Grace? I asked. She hesitated, looking toward the hallway like someone might hear her. After he lost his job, he started changing. He told me not to tell anyone, especially you. He said you'd worry. He didn't want you to think he failed. I felt my heart stop for a second. Lost his job. I repeated quietly. When? Almost 6 months ago, she said, her eyes brimming again. He said it was temporary. But then the bills piled up. The pressure, the pride, he started pushing me away. I sat there, stunned. My son had been suffering, and I didn't even know. He had chosen silence over his mother's shoulder. He had chosen pride over prayer. Grace continued, her voice trembling. He gets angry when I mention work. He says he's figuring it out. But some nights he doesn't come home until morning. I don't ask anymore, because asking feels like fighting. I reached out and held her hand. It was cold, fragile, like something too tired to keep holding itself together. She looked at me, tears fresh again. I wanted to call you Mama James.
So many times.
But he said. She stopped, biting her lip. He said what? I asked gently. Her voice broke. He said, he doesn't want you interfering. He said you always make him feel small. I froze.
Me?
Make him feel small? I felt my heart squeeze in a way I hadn't known it could. I thought of all the nights I had sat awake praying for him, of the time I sold my wedding ring for his tuition, of the years my back bent under work so his dreams could stand tall. And now he saw me as the reason he couldn't lift his head. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, feeling like my whole life had been rewritten by someone else's hand. Grace reached for my arm. I didn't believe it, Mama, she whispered quickly. You've always been kind to me. But he gets so angry whenever your name comes up. I think he's hurting, but he won't admit it. I think he's ashamed. Ashamed. That word hit me harder than all the rest. My son was ashamed of me, of his mother, of the woman who carried him through the storms of life. I stayed there in that kitchen for hours, helping her clean up the broken plate, cooking rice while she talked. She needed comfort and I needed answers. Every story she told drew a new crack across the glass of what I thought was my family. She said he had started borrowing money from friends, then gambling to make it back. When she confronted him, he said, "You don't understand what it means to be a man." When she cried, he would walk out, leaving her alone until morning. The house was quiet now, but I could almost hear the echoes of those nights, the slammed doors, the arguments whispered into pillows, the exhaustion of pretending everything was fine. When I finally decided to leave, Grace hugged me tightly, her tears soaking into my shoulder. "Please don't tell him I told you," she begged. "I just needed someone to talk to." I promised her I wouldn't, but my heart knew it couldn't keep silent forever. That evening, when Daniel came home, I was still sitting on the porch. He stopped in surprise, his eyes wide.
"Nana."
I looked up slowly. "Yes, Daniel. It's me." He stood there, frozen, guilt flickering in his eyes like a candlelight trying to hide. "What are you doing here?" I kept my voice calm. "I came to check on Grace." He sighed, his shoulders tightening. "I told you not to come." "Yes," I said quietly. "You did. But I'm your mother, Daniel. Not a visitor you can ban." He opened his mouth, ready to argue. But then something in my eyes must have stopped him. He sat down beside me instead, elbows on his knees, staring into the evening air. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt like a wall we had both helped build. Then he whispered, "Mama, I messed up." I waited. "I lost my job months ago. I didn't tell anyone. I thought I could fix it before you found out. I didn't want you to think I failed." His voice cracked, and I saw the little boy again, the one who used to cry when his kite got stuck in the tree. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Daniel," I said softly, "failure isn't falling. It's refusing to stand back up." He shook his head, tears glistening in his eyes. "I didn't just fail at work, Mama. I failed Grace. I failed myself. I started gambling, trying to make back what I lost. I thought I could turn everything around." His confession came in waves. The debt, the lies,
The shame.
each word pulled another stitch from the fabric of my heart. "I pushed you away because I didn't want you to see what I had become," he whispered. "And I told Grace not to call you because I couldn't bear to see your disappointment." I took a deep breath, holding back tears. "Daniel, I could never be disappointed in your struggle. Only in your silence." He broke down then. He leaned forward, his face buried in his hands, sobbing like the world had finally stopped pretending for him. I held him like I used to when nightmares chased him from his bed. But motherhood doesn't end at forgiveness. It begins again there. So after he calmed, I spoke the truth gently. "You hurt her, Daniel. You hurt Grace with your pride. And you hurt me with your distance. Love doesn't mean never falling. It means letting someone hold your hand while you rise." He nodded weakly. "I know, Mama. I'm not saying this to shame you," I continued, my voice trembling, "but to remind you who you are. You come from fighters, from believers. Don't drown in pride when you could float on grace." For the next few days, I stayed with them, not as a guest, but as a quiet healer. I cooked. I prayed softly while washing dishes. Grace and I sat on the porch, watching the sunrise, saying little but meaning much. Daniel began to change slowly. He apologized to his wife. He started looking for work again. He even joined us in morning prayer once or twice. But broken things rarely heal without scars. One evening, I overheard him on the phone with a friend. His voice was low, filled with frustration. He said, "I can't focus with her here. She reminds me of everything I'm not." At first, I thought he was talking about Grace. Then I realized he meant me. I froze by the hallway, my heart dropping into quiet disbelief. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but maybe I was meant to, because that moment told me everything. Even though he had confessed, even though he was trying, part of him still saw me as a mirror reflecting his weakness. He didn't see my presence as love, he saw it as a shadow. And that night I made my decision. I waited until morning. I cooked breakfast, simple eggs and toast, nothing fancy. We ate together quietly. Then I stood up, wiped my hands and said, "Daniel, I'll be going back home today." Grace looked up in surprise. "But Mama," I smiled softly. "You too need space to rebuild, and I need peace to pray."
Daniel didn't stop me.
He just nodded, his eyes on the table. I kissed Grace on the forehead and hugged her tightly. When I reached the door, I turned back and said quietly, "Daniel, I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't always mean staying." He lifted his head then, eyes red. "Mama, I'm sorry." I nodded. "I know, my son. But some lessons are not learned by hearing, 'I'm sorry.' They're learned by feeling what it costs." Then I walked out. The bus ride home felt endless. I stared out the window at the passing trees, each one reflecting pieces of my memory. His first day of school, his graduation, the wedding, the pot of soup. So much love poured into one child, and yet love alone couldn't save him from himself. When I reached my small apartment, I sat at the table and cried, not for the hurt, but for the letting go. Because there's a kind of sorrow that doesn't destroy you, it purifies you. Over the next few weeks, he didn't call. Grace texted sometimes, short messages like, "Good morning, Mama," or "We're okay." That was enough. I began to sleep better. Not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped carrying. It took me 71 years to learn that even love needs rest. And in that rest, I began to heal. But one evening, just when I thought peace had settled, I received a call that reopened everything. It was Grace again, her voice shaking, tears in every syllable. "Mama James," she whispered, "you need to come. Something's happened." I felt the blood leave my face. "What is it, Grace?" "It's Daniel," she said, her breath catching. "He's gone."
Gone.
That single word tore through me like lightning through dry wood. And that was the beginning of the discovery. When Grace said, "He's gone," the world around me seemed to blur. I gripped the edge of the table, as if holding on to that could stop everything from spinning. "Gone where?" I asked, though my voice was barely there. Her sobs filled the silence. "I don't know," she said between breaths. "He left before dawn. He took his bag, his car keys, and a letter." "A letter?" I whispered.
Yes.
"He left it on the bed." I closed my eyes and felt my heart beat like it was trying to escape my chest. There are some silences that weigh more than words ever could. That morning was one of them. I didn't wait for details. I packed a shawl, grabbed my purse, and took the next bus across town. The road outside the window rolled past like a slow heartbeat, each bump a reminder that I was moving towards something I didn't understand. When I reached the house, the door was half open. Grace stood by the window, her face pale and hollow, holding a crumpled sheet of paper in her shaking hand. She looked at me like a child who had seen something too painful to describe. I stepped closer. "Let me see it." She hesitated, then handed it over. The paper was damp at the edges. She had cried on it. The handwriting was Daniel's. My son's. The same hand that once wrote, "I love you, Mama," on birthday cards. I read slowly, my eyes blurring halfway through each line. "Grace, I can't do this anymore. I tried to fix things, but every day feels heavier. I keep hearing Mama's voice in my head, the voice that reminds me I was raised better than this. And that voice makes me ashamed of who I've become. I've disappointed you both, and I don't see a way out right now. I just need time.
Please don't look for me.
I'm sorry for everything." I sat down hard on the couch, the letter trembling in my hands. Grace dropped to her knees beside me, crying again. "Mama, what do we do?" I didn't have an answer. The kind of pain that letter carried couldn't be mended with food or words. It was the kind that eats from the inside out. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream. How could he? But all I felt was a deep, heavy sorrow, a mother's sorrow that no language can hold. I folded the letter carefully, pressed it to my chest, and whispered, "Lord, wherever my son is, put your hand on his heart." For the next few days, we searched quietly. We called his friends, his coworkers, even his old pastor. Nobody knew where he'd gone. His phone was switched off. His car was gone. The city felt too big and too silent. Grace stopped eating. I tried to stay strong, cooking her soup, forcing smiles I didn't feel. But at night, when the house went still, I sat by the window, praying through the tears. "God," I whispered one night, "you gave me this child. If you must humble him, please don't destroy him. Let him find his way back." The nights turned into a week into two. And then, one morning, the doorbell rang. When Grace opened the door, 2 police officers stood there. One of them held his hat in his hands. That gesture alone told me everything I didn't want to hear. "Are you Mrs. Grace James?" the officer asked softly. She nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes." He sighed, glancing at me before continuing. "There's been an incident. Your husband was found near the riverbank early this morning." Grace gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I stood still, my heart suddenly calm. Too calm. People say shock feels like chaos, but no. It feels like silence. Like the air disappears and you're standing in a vacuum of disbelief. "Is he?" she started, but couldn't finish. The officer nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." I remember falling to my knees, though I don't recall feeling the floor. It was as if my body separated from my soul. The sound that came out of me didn't belong to language. It was older than words, the sound of a mother's heart breaking again. He had driven to the river in the night. The car was found abandoned. They said it looked like he sat there for hours, thinking, before the water took him. People called it suicide. I called it surrender. The funeral came quickly. A blur of flowers, photographs, and people whispering about what a good man he was. I sat there, motionless, while everyone else cried. My tears had already run dry. Grief doesn't always need witnesses. When they lowered the casket, Grace screamed. I reached for her hand and held it until her body went still. Then I whispered into the wind, "Rest, my son. I forgive you." But forgiveness didn't feel like peace. It felt like emptiness wearing a calm face. After the funeral, the house was quiet again.
Too quiet.
Grace moved through it like a shadow, tidying things that didn't need tidying. Every room held his scent, his cologne, his shoes, his books. She couldn't bear to touch any of it. One afternoon, while she slept, I began cleaning the study. I told myself it was just to help her, but really I was searching for something, anything that might explain why. In the drawer of his desk, under old bills and envelopes, I found a small black notebook. It was worn, the edges soft from use. Inside were pages of scribbled notes, prayers, and confessions written like letters to God. I read slowly, my hands trembling. Lord, I want to be strong, but I feel like a child pretending to be a man. I hate that I can't talk to my mother without feeling like she sees the old me, the boy who had nothing. Grace deserves more than this broken version of me. Then, near the end of the notebook, one line stood alone, underlined twice. Maybe God's mercy is sometimes just the chance to rest. I closed the book and pressed it against my chest. That's when the tears finally came. Not the wild kind from shock, but slow, aching tears that come when you understand something too late. My son hadn't just lost his job. He had lost himself. The world told him that his worth was measured by what he could provide, not who he was. And when that was taken away, he couldn't find his reflection anymore. He was a man who loved deeply but couldn't accept love when it came without condition. He thought my presence reminded him of failure, when really it reminded him of truth, that love never needed him to earn it. For weeks after, I walked by the river where they found him. The water was calm, almost kind, as if trying to apologize for what it had taken. I brought flowers, not because I believed he was there, but because I needed somewhere to talk to him. "Daniel," I whispered one morning, "I wish you had called me. You didn't need to fix it all. You just needed to come home." The wind moved gently through the trees. For a moment, it felt like he was answering, not with words, but with peace. Grace and I grew closer in the months that followed. Grief has a way of knitting hearts that share the same wound. We started going to church together again. Some Sundays, she would cry through the hymns, and I would squeeze her hand, letting her know she wasn't alone. She told me one day, "Mama, I keep dreaming that Daniel walks into the kitchen smiling. I wake up, and it hurts all over again." I smiled sadly. "That's not just a dream, my dear. That's love checking in." Time passed. Seasons changed. People stopped calling as often. The world moved on, as it always does. But one evening, as I was preparing to leave Grace's house, she handed me a small envelope. "I found this," she said quietly. It was inside his Bible. I opened it slowly. It was a short note, written to me this time. "Mama, if you ever read this, know that I love you. I never stopped. I'm sorry I pushed you away. I was trying to become a man you could be proud of, but somewhere along the way, I forgot that you already were." The handwriting was shaky, rushed. I pressed it against my heart, and the tears came again. Tears of grief, yes, but also of gratitude. Because even though I had lost my son, God had given me one last message to hold on to, proof that love had the final word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets and the faint hum of cars passing. The moon hung above like a quiet witness. And I whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Even in the ending, You are merciful. I wish I could tell you that the pain ever truly leaves, but it doesn't. It just changes its shape. It becomes quieter, humbler. It walks beside you instead of behind you. Some nights, I still dream of Daniel as a little boy, running through our small apartment, his laughter filling every empty corner. And when I wake up, I whisper, "I miss you, my son," before the world starts again. But I've learned that love doesn't end in death. It just moves to a place our eyes can't see. Grace eventually moved to another city. She still calls me Mama. Sometimes she sends pictures of the garden she's planted behind her new house. And every year on Daniel's birthday, we light a candle and read a psalm together over the phone. The world keeps teaching me that people can leave, but love never does. The people we raise, the ones we cry for, the ones who wound us and then vanish, they never take our love with them. It stays. It lingers in letters, in notebooks, in recipes, in the smell of soup simmering quietly on the stove. That is what motherhood is, a love that keeps cooking even when there's no one left to feed. And though I will never fully understand why God allowed me to outlive my child, I've made peace with one thing. My prayers reached him, even if my arms couldn't. By the time spring came again, the river bloomed with lilies. I walked there one morning, placed a small bouquet of white ones by the water's edge, and said aloud, "Rest easy, my son. You've found your peace, and I've found mine, not in forgetting you, but in forgiving the silence you left behind." Sometimes I still hear his voice when the wind moves through my curtains. Sometimes I smell his cologne in the hallway for no reason. And when I do, I smile and whisper, "I hear you, Daniel. Mama's still here." That was the discovery, not of where he went, but of what he left behind. A reminder that love, even when buried under pride, still finds a way to speak. And that forgiveness is not letting go of the past. It's choosing to breathe again, even while holding the memory close. Grief taught me to wake before dawn, not to beat the sun, but to hear the quiet before the city remembers its noise. In that quiet, I make tea, open the window, and let the air find me. I lay Daniel's notebook on the table and rest my hand on its cover like a prayer that never ends. Some days I read a page. Most days, I only sit with it. Silence can be a sanctuary when you decide not to fill it with worry. I've learned to breathe inside it, slow and steady, like knitting with the lungs. In and out, in and out. A mother's new ritual. People ask how I am, and I tell them the truth that is simple and hard. I am healing. They want the quick version. No tears, no pauses, but healing is a long road with soft shoulders. Sometimes I pull over. Sometimes I walk. But I am moving. I keep his photograph on the mantle, one from his graduation day. He is mid-laugh, head tilted, caught by joy he wasn't ready to hold still. I talk to that picture sometimes, not because I think he needs my voice, but because I need it. "Your mother is all right," I say. God is too good to leave me broken. Grace calls on Sundays. She always begins with Mama, and I answer like a door that was waiting to be knocked. We don't talk about the river every time. Grief cannot live in the main room forever. It has to move to a quieter corner. She tells me about the tomatoes in her garden and how the neighbor's cat thinks the world belongs to it. I tell her I tried a new recipe and that the stew turned out too proud, needed humbling with a little extra water. We laugh, and it surprises us both. Laughter after sorrow feels like standing on your own feet again. You check the floor twice to make sure it still holds. We agreed, without saying it, that our love is what remains. The rest can be folded and put away. There are days when she cries again, and I let the silence hold us while she breathes. We don't rush grief. We escort it to the edge and tell it, "You can leave when you are ready." I went back to church on a gentle Sunday. The usher's gloves were white as snow that had decided to be clean for once. The choir sang an old hymn that knows how to carry a tired heart, and I let it carry mine. The pastor looked at me from the pulpit with the kind of kindness that doesn't pry. After service, a young mother asked me, "How do you forgive someone who broke you?" I took her hands, small, warm, shaking like a leaf that wants to be brave. "Forgiveness," I told her, is not a door you throw open. It's a latch you lift every day until the hinge remembers how to turn. She nodded, not because it fixed her, but because the truth had finally found a chair to sit on. I forgave my son in pieces. At the grave, I forgave the leaving. At my kitchen table, I forgave the silence. By the river, I forgave the pride that would not eat. In each place, a small yes. In each yes, another thread pulled from the knot. Forgiveness did not mean I forgot the ache of the porch that day, holding warm soup while my welcome cooled. It did not mean I excused the nights Grace cried alone. It meant I chose not to carry his choices like bags with broken handles. I set them down, and in setting them down, I could finally lift my own life again. I visit the market on Wednesdays, the way I did when Daniel was small and shoes were a luxury. Vendors greet me by name. An old woman sells oranges from a wooden crate and always slips an extra into my bag. Because you look like somebody's mother, she says. I smile and answer, I am. Sometimes I see men who remind me of my son, shoulders set like they are holding up the sky alone. If the moment allows, I say, it is all right to ask for help. Some smile politely and walk on. A few stop long enough to let the words breathe between us. Seeds don't always show you their roots. I plant them anyway. At home, I keep a small notebook for the living, a sister to the one Daniel left behind. I write down the names of people I am praying for. A neighbor waiting on test results, a boy trying to leave the street, a tired nurse who says sleep forgot her. I add Grace to the list every Monday, even when she says she is fine. Fine is the code grief, wears to church. I remember. I learned to bless the empty spaces. The chair beside the window that used to hold his coat. The part of the shelf where his cologne stood like a little certainty. The pocket of air in the hallway that still smells, some evenings, like his after-work hug. I bless them because love doesn't leave. It changes rooms. On what would have been his next birthday, I baked a small cake. No candles, just frosting and memory. I carried a slice to the river and sat on a bench where the light makes a path across the water. I said out loud, I release you, child. I release the version of you I kept trying to hold. The water held my words the way only water can, without arguing, without returning them. I will not pretend, I never ask why. I ask. But my why has softened into what now? What now shall I do with this love that has nowhere to sleep? So I give it beds, soup for a neighbor, a bus pass for a boy trying, a shawl for the woman waiting outside the clinic. Love needs work or it turns into rust. People say time heals all wounds. I don't agree. Time teaches you how to dress the wound yourself, how to change the bandage in the dark, how to press around the tender place without spilling. God heals. Time simply gives you the hours to notice it happening. I made a choice I keep remaking. To remain a mother without needing to be needed. It sounds small, it is a mountain. I climb it daily with short steps. Tea, prayer, a walk, a call to grace, a pot of stew shared with the woman down the hall who lost her sister and hides it with jokes. I do not live inside the old ache of Daniel's house. I visit the memory like a museum where I refuse to touch the glass. I can see it, the porch, the soup, the sentence that ended my welcome. And I can see the kitchen where Grace wept, the letter, the officers, the notebook, the river, the lilies. All of it is true, but I do not live there. I live here, in the room God kept for me in the land of the living. One evening, the sky went the color of ripe mango. I sat on my stoop and watched children chalk galaxies on the sidewalk. A little girl drew a house and wrote the word hope above the door. She asked, "Do you like it?" I said, "Baby, I love it." She nodded like an artist acknowledged by a museum and ran off laughing. I stayed a while longer, letting hope write itself on my own doorway. When I think of Daniel now, I think of the boy who cracked jokes too early in the morning. I think of the man who tried. Oh, he tried, and the weight that taught him the wrong lesson. I do not speak to him with reproach. I speak to him with rest. Your mother forgives you, I say. Your mother forgives the silence, the leaving, the river, the pride. Then I add what I should have said more often when he was here. Your mother forgives herself, too. Forgives herself for not hearing the ache sooner. For believing food could fill a hole shame had dug. For standing too long on a porch where love had to hold its breath. Forgiveness must pass through you to reach anyone else. I let it pass. It washed me clean without erasing what I knew. Some nights, I light a small candle and place it by the window. Not because I am waiting for him to come back, but because that little wick tells the dark what it needs to know. I am still here. I am warm. I am held by a God who does not sleep. I have learned to bless even the hard sentences. Mama, please don't come here again. They were a knife then. Now, they are a signpost. The last turn before the road that brought me to this quiet peace. Pain led me here, yes, but I did not come alone. Mercy walked with me. If you ask me the lesson, I will give it gently, the way you set a cup down for an old hand. Our children are not our mirrors. They are their own unfinished prayers. We raise them, we love them, we let them go, and sometimes they let go of us too soon. But God does not let go. Not even at the river. I keep a line near my heart for days when the ache wakes early. Sometimes losing them is how God saves you. Saves you from a worship that would have turned child into idol. Saves you from a life spent measuring your worth by their nearness. Saves you for the work that is still yours to do, work stitched with kindness, steady and small. I do not know what tomorrow asks of me, but I know how I will answer. With a pot on the stove, with a chair pulled out for whoever needs to sit, with a prayer whispered like bread broken in a quiet room. With the softest part of my voice saved for the hurting, the ashamed, the ones standing on porches holding warm soup and colder news. If you see me on the bus, smile. If you need a recipe, ask. If you have a story that sits heavy and will not move, bring it to my table. We will carry it between us until it learns your name instead of your fear. I am an old woman who has lived through the flood and can still point to dry ground. I forgive my son. I bless his memory. I honor the love that made him, the love that lost him, and the love that still fills the room when I say his name. I bless Grace, her new garden, her steady courage, the way she keeps a light on without making a drama of it. I bless the river for returning me to myself. And I bless you listening to me now. Whoever you are, wherever you are, however your own porch story ended. May you find the kind of peace that does not erase the past, but reads it with kinder eyes. May you learn the weight of your own heart and carry it honestly, without pretending it is light or demanding others lift it for you. May you meet God in the quiet and recognize that He has been there the whole time, even when your phone was off and your courage was small. If you ask me what remains, I will answer with a mother's certainty. Love remains. Prayer remains. The steady work of gentleness remains. And the promise that sometimes losing them is how God saves you, that remains most of all. If you have ever been hurt by your own family, remember, God still sees your tears.